In this episode, I'll be talking with popular clinician, educator, and podcaster Warwick Schiller. Warwick comes from the reining world, where he was NRHA Reserve World Champion, and he's also represented his home country of Australia in the 2010 and 2018 World Equestrian Games. But like myself, Warwick has gone through a transformation in how he trains and teaches. He has online educational resources and a popular podcast called The Journey On Podcast, where he shares his stories of transformational growth in both his horse training career and his personal life. In his podcast, he also has guests share about their own life-altering stories, motivations, and influences. I was a guest on his podcast, and I'm so excited now to have him join me here on mine. So I think you're going to love this conversation as we go into horsemanship, horse business, personal development, and just life, and so much more. So here we go, episode 109, Warwick Schiller. Hi, I'm Karen Rolfe, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So let's get started. Well, I am here with Warwick Schiller, everyone. Welcome, Warwick.
Hey, Karen, how's it going?
It's going really well. So thank you for joining me. I know it's between our two schedules, it's a little tricky, but I really enjoyed being a guest on your podcast and what we ended up talking about. So I am thrilled that I can have you as a guest on mine.
What we ended up talking about, that was, it was so cool because, I didn't know that much about you apart from you're good with horses. And so it was so cool that, we ended up going where we ended up going to, like 1 minute we're talking about horses and the next minute you're on the Temple of the Sun with a shaman. And I'm like, you're the exact right person for my podcast. And I didn't know anything about that, about you. But, it's funny, I've had, I don't know how many podcasts you've done. I've done 90. I think I've recorded 90 now, I think. And it's, and you talk to people who are maybe, say good, quote unquote, with horses. I don't mean good as in they're Olympic gold medalist. I mean, they kind of get it. And then you find that there's all these other personal journeys on the side that allows them to be that way anyway. So it's, I think it's less about your technique with horses and more about the other stuff.
Well, I really enjoyed that came up. I mean, I think anybody who's listened to your podcast realizes what a great storyteller you are and how good you are at drawing out other people's stories. Because I sure didn't come to your podcast ready to talk about those things. So I mean, it was super fun for me. So I have to say I'm a little bit like, you set a good standard. I gotta be as good an interviewer as you are. We'll see how I do.
The word that I was talking to someone the other day, the word that comes up, not just for the podcast, but for life is curiosity. The word just being curious about things. And I'm curious about, I don't know how the hell I got you to Temple of the, I think it might have been you. I don't know if we talked about books or something. It might have been the 4 Agreements. I forget.
Yeah.
But we were cruising along, and then all of a sudden, we took this turn, and the next thing that the guy comes in the room and talks to you and leaves, and no one else in the room sees him. And
exactly.
Why didn't they see him? Well, he didn't want to be seen. Like, whoa, okay, that's cool stuff.
Yeah, cool. Well, the other kind of cool thing about having you here, Warwick, is it seems that a lot of students and horse owners out there have both of us on their team, right? So sometimes I could have phrased that as like, my students, are also your students, but I don't think they're my students or your students. But, I feel like I'm part of people's teams, but I know we have a lot of crossover. So a lot of people in my community also enjoy your community. So I think that's really cool. So I know we share some common principles and priorities. I think another thing we have in common is we both have made some big shifts in how we train and how we teach. And I think we both have in common sort of a passion for personal development and see it as sort of inseparable from horsemanship. So I kind of want to touch on all those things. I think we're going to have plenty to talk about. Are you up for this?
Oh yeah, yeah, but I agree with you right there. Like the way I look at the horse stuff these days, it's just so much easier to do things with horses. There's a lot less techniques involved, but there's got to be a paradigm shift in how you view the world, how how you see what happens in front of you. You're in the lens with which you view things, because if you view the horses through a certain lens, they're going to behave a certain way. I'm a big believer in you create your own reality sort of thing, because you do with the horses, and they will be whatever. Excuse me. I'm just getting over COVID, so I've got a bit of cough.
Oh my goodness.
They will be whatever you want them to be, sort of thing. So yeah, so it's.
Yeah. So actually, one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about is the big shift, right? So you say a lot like, well, I don't do it like that anymore. I do things differently. How would you describe how you do how you do things differently now compared to before?
I would say, I used to be very, very good at training horses to be obedient without being rough or tough on them. I used to be good at solving problem horses and stuff, and it was, the way I would go about it was go back to the very beginning and start in the beginning. I just think my beginning start is different these days. It's about connection and really understanding the mammalian nervous system, rather than it being about I wouldn't say coercing them into being obedient, but that like the mindset used to be, to get to the mind, move their feet. Like move their feet was a big paradigm thing. Move their feet to get to their mind. Whereas these days, I found that if you can get to the mind, the feet just follow. And the mind, for me, it's all about connection these days. That's the short version. I mean, I could go on for days.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, and I think you and I both have, like, we had training, we competed, there's all this technique. And then, and also, like you, I was one of the nice ones, right? So I was never one of the beat them up and make them submit kind of things. And now there's this shift to more like relationship and connection. And I think a lot of students will ask me, like, well, does all this connection stuff work? Would it work even if I didn't already know the technique? It's like, oh, well, you had all that technique first, so now the connection works. But I also find more and more, it's like no matter where you're starting from, even if you're just starting, like if you have to start somewhere, connection is a great place to start. So have you had any, in teaching, any thoughts about, your journey was techniques into more connection relationship? Can it work the other way around?
Well, I think if you have one and not the other, you're going to come to a dead end somewhere. And for me, like my dead end was my wife bought a reining horse that was, very, very obedient, but kind of a shut down sort of a horse. And, in the reining with him, the thing I wanted to fix them, like we bought him cheap, but he was, probably worth 3 times what we paid for him if he could get shown, if you could get him shown the talent, the stuff he could do. He was a big time horse, but he just didn't get shown well, just because he carried this level of tension in his body that he would run around on the loose run and do all the hard stuff. But like say running fast circles, he would get tense and bounce his hind feet together every once in a while. And so that's a 1-point penalty. You're out of lead when they bounce their hind feet together. You're no longer in your canter stride. And so he might do that 3 or 4 times during a pattern. Well, if with the reining, you start out with a 70 and you get up and down from there, you can win a lot of reinings with a 74. And so Robin could mark a 70 on him and have 4 penalty points, have him bounce his little hind feet together 4 times in the circles. So he could do all the really hard stuff. And I couldn't train that out of him. More training didn't work. So that's what really led me down the whole rabbit hole. But I see people who really want to get into this whole connection thing, but they have no technique. And as long as you don't want to do too much, you can get along just fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As long as you want to have a companion animal or just, have a great relationship with them. But when you start to add, well, you want to do this and you want to do that, you've got to be able to have some technique to go along with that connection. So I think you're gonna come to an end point if you have just technique or just connection. But I think the holy grail is having the both, and of course, the more a complex understanding of the both you have, the more magic you can create.
Yeah, and I think that's that's where things get really interesting, right? Because if you just want to be with your horse and out in the pasture, that's sort of easy in a way. And then if you just want to get on and ride, that's easy way. But to have that connection and then bring it forward with you, I think to a high level, especially, is sort of where all the interesting stuff happens. But if you had to pick one, hey, if you just choose the connection, at least you guys are going to both be happy and getting along and probably safer. Yeah.
Yeah, just the thing with the connection stuff, it prevents a lot of, I'm not even going to say behaviors because I'm not even behaviors, but it prevents a lot of things that I used to be really good at training out of horses. You know what I mean? Once I got really into polyvagal theory and stuff like that, and understanding that freeze response, I realized that what a lot of the training I've done in the past has been kind of really good at taking a horse that's in a flight or fight response and turning it into a subtle level of freeze response. And now they're controllable. But then you've got to be able to train a horse who has this bit of a freeze response. So they might not be as forward as you want. Their legs might not swing as well as you want. They might not be as soft in their body as you want. I used to be really good at, teaching horses to not be stiff. Well, I realize now that the way I went about the initial handling of them caused them to be stiff. Mm-hmm. And I patted myself on the back and I was really good at getting them unstiff. Whereas now, when you can have that connection, and then you have them say they're standing still because they're in that, that ventral vagal complex. If you're into polyvagal theory, they're in that social engagement mode where they're just hanging out with you because they like to hang out with you, not because it's the least bad option. They're in a totally different state, and you find that all the parts work so well,
Yeah, and that having that connection to dissolve a lot of the defensive behavior. I think so many of the problems that I've seen with horses and that I've helped horses with, when you trace it back, it's a defense mechanism against something, and a lot of times the something they're defending themselves against is the humans, the things that we're doing. And sort of really feeling lately, really being aware of the power that I have to cause as many, to cause the problems, and to really just step it back and say, at first, let's make sure I'm not causing any problems, and the power of waiting and observing and really seeing the horse. And you talk a lot about this with the attunement. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about what you mean about attunement and attuned horsemanship.
Yeah, so I just recently, last year sometime maybe, I think, changed the name of my business. It had been Warwick Schiller performance horsemanship. And the reason it was performance horsemanship, because when I moved to Australia, my family moved to Australia from 2006 to 2010. And when we moved back, I started all over again. And, you know, I was in the reining, doing the reining stuff. And most people, their business is, you know, so-and-so reining horses or so-and-so performance horses. And then you have the colt starter, horsemanshipy guys, and their business is so-and-so horsemanship. And I was kind of the opinion there is not a dividing line where one starts and one finishes, you know, one ends and one starts sort of thing. So it was performance horsemanship. And I was interested in, you know, competing and training horses to a high level in the reining. But I was really interested in the whole horsemanship side of it. But then as the years have gone on, like, you know, I started changing things. I really got into, there's a UCLA professor of psychology named Daniel Siegel, and he talks about attunement and the sense of being seen and being heard. And I had a guest on the podcast from Canada named Sarah Schlotti, and she's a trauma therapist, but she's kind of enhanced that, saying to attunement's the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, and getting gotten. And a minute ago when you said, you know, when you really start to see the horse, you know, I think when you start to see the horse, instead of seeing their behavior with the lens of whatever interpretation you have layered over the top of it, you really see what's going on. And you know, that's what the attunement is really all about. Is I probably, if I was going to quantify it, it would be a lot of it is communicating my awareness of their awareness. You know, like there was an old Ray Hunt saying, they know when you know and they know when you don't. And I used to think that Ray Hunt saying meant they know when you know what you're doing and they know when you don't know what you're doing. You know, they can tell a greenhorn from a mile away sort of thing, which I think is true too. But then a number of years ago, I read an article by someone who was around Ray Hunt a lot, and he said, you know, when you're around a horse, you got to know what their eyes are doing, what their ears are doing, what their muzzles are doing, what their nostrils are doing, what their flanks are doing, how their breathing is, what their tail's doing. Is it up? Is it down? Is it clamped? Is it loose? What their back's doing. And you need to know all of that, because they know when you know and they know when you don't. So they can basically tell when you are present and aware of what's going on. And I have found the more I can communicate my awareness of their awareness and their focus, that's kind of like the holy grail. And I was influenced a lot by some of the stuff that Elsa Sinclair does with that. That really, like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it was some of it was stuff I was already doing and not knowing why it worked. And so we're in a really, you know, when I really got into like polyvagal theory and stuff like that, like basically the human trauma stuff is what really informed me a lot about the horses. But that whole, you know, it almost gets to the point where it's about communicating your awareness of their awareness of your awareness of their awareness. It's, you know.
Yeah, I love that. It's the, yeah, seeing and feeling those really small changes. Oh, I saw that, you know? So, I mean, you can get really technical and it's like releasing at the right time. Well, if you're not aware, you're not going to release. But there's something even more of like, well, you said it perfectly. Like, I see you seeing me. I see you just move your eyeball from there to here, or feeling those little changes. And I mean, that's where it comes down to being in the moment, which I think connects to all that personal development stuff we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, you know, and the other thing I think is hugely important for me, the way I look at things is there's no right or wrong. As in, like you said, you know, I see your eyeball went from here to there. Well, I wouldn't care if the eyeball went from here to there or there to here. Like, I don't care if it's moving towards me or away from me. It's not one's good, one's bad. It's like, I saw that. Oh, and I saw that. And I saw that. And I saw that, you know, and like the horse, the reining horse that, you know, started me down this rabbit hole, he's out here in the pasture. I haven't ridden him for a number of years now. But whenever I approach him, he will stand there. And if you are approach him, and you can be quite a distance away, and he might turn his head away from you like half an inch, just this slight little movement. And if you don't respond to that, if you don't pause when he does that and you just march up to him, he'll stand there and he'll let you put the halter on, but his eyes don't move and his ears don't move, and he's just like, yes, I'll do what you want. But if from 30 feet away, his nose moves half an inch to the right, or his eyeballs turn to the right. It's harder now with the summer because he's got a fly mask on. But if he turns his nose away from you slightly and you're 30 feet away, you just pause for a split second. It'll come back towards you, and then you take another step, and he might look away slightly, and then you pause, and then you take another step, and then he looks at you, and when you walk up to him, he's like, hey, dude, how's it going? And that's 30 feet away. But if you don't tell him from 30 feet away that you notice the little things, he's not going to say, hey, dude, how's it going? He's going to, okay, you're one of those people. You don't notice little things. Okay, I can be that horse. Like, I can do exactly what you want. But there's not going to be any back and forth here. I'll just do as I'm told. And yeah, it's so subtle. It's so cool. I love doing it. I love playing with it. We've got a foal here that I've been messing with, and the girl that works for us, she also, we don't have much for her to do around here, so she lives here, but she rides horses in another place, and then she spends half the day working for another horse trainer around here. And she was out there watching me with him last night, and she's got a yearling. And she said, you know what, I got to the point here, I just love doing this stuff. And I said, which stuff? The training after you've created the connection, or just the hanging out with him? She goes, just the hanging out with him, just the little interactions. I love that stuff,
That's cool. Awesome. I love that stuff too. So what would you say you're still working on when it comes to training horses?
Me. Pretty much. Me. Yeah, pretty much me. And I know that sounds like it's a kind of a glib sort of a blah, blanket sort of an answer, but there's not really anything. Like, I have no desire to compete anymore. My wife and I thought we wanted to do something different to compete, and right now we like riding around the block and trail riding. So I don't have any performance or technique related goals that I'm aiming towards. Yeah, it's really me, and I'd say for me it's being present for longer periods of time. Like I'm not very present for long periods of time. Anytime, I can do it, and then I've got to dissociate, sort of thing. And the longest I can do it is with horses. But yeah, it's just me stuff. I know
it's an awesome answer. Yeah, I love the answer, and I think it's interesting because you gave a clear answer, and then almost like there was a feeling of like, oh, I have to explain this a little bit, and I go through a little of that as a professional, because I'm like, well, if I'm a professional, I'm supposed to be having these other goals. But I think, gosh, if I'm not competing and I don't have these other goals, and that means I'm doing it really because I love it. Because I know professionals say, well, if I'm not competing, I'm not going to do anything. So I think it's really beautiful work. That's like, you're here, you're working on yourself, and you're here with horses simply because you love them. So I think that doesn't need any further explanation. All right, here's a question for you. If horses could understand English for a minute or a sentence or something like that, what would you tell them? If all of a sudden your horses could you could just speak to them, what would you want to say?
Could I ask them something?
Yes, you can say any words that you want.
Oh, well, I thought I had to tell them something.
Oh, yeah. I'll just say, what would you say to them? What words would you say to them?
I'd probably ask. I'd actually probably. Who would it be? We've got several odd ducks here, including the one that kind of led me down the rabbit hole. But I'd probably ask them, what can I do differently? We've got a stallion here my wife bought a couple of years ago, and he was quite shut down like that other horse. And luckily I kind of knew how to work through it to the best of my current knowledge. And he's still quite weird in some ways. Like he has we've had 3 foals in the last 4 years. And I've worked on relationship first with all of them, and like a consent-based approach to where I didn't ever try to touch them. I'd go and hang out with them. If they come and sniff me, they come and sniff me. And it wasn't until they were completely comfortable around me before I ever started actually doing anything with them. And they are completely different than any other horse I've ever been around. And I had someone on my Facebook group here a while ago kind of tell me about he got this, maybe it was a Mustang or something or other, and he said, things are going really well. And I don't think so that the 2 oldest of our foals, one's 3, one's a yearling, is Chance and Rupert. And Rupert was actually named after podcast guest Rupert Isaacson because he impressed me so much on the podcast. We named the foal after him. But this guy said, I'm not sure my horse will ever get to the point of Chance and Rupert where they have an absence of mistrust. And I was like, whoa, that's a great saying. An absence of mistrust. Well, this stallion that we've got here, he lives out in a pasture with a gelding, but he's actually the opposite. He has an absence of trust. He's, you can go catch him and ride him and whatever, and he's, he's amenable, but there's an absence of trust. It's not an absence of mistrust with the others. There's an absence of trust, and with him, I'd like to know, what can I do to help you through that? Because he's deaf, and I don't think the deafness has anything to do with his weirdness. I think he's a very, very sensitive horse, and he was trained. How would you put it? Like he was in the Marines, okay? It's all drill sergeant stuff, and you have to do exactly. And there is no asking how do you feel about that. It's just you have to do it. And like the guy the reining trainer that trained him has trained a lot of really good horses. But I do think the really sensitive ones are the ones that really shut down and kind of go inside their head. And he was really that way. But yeah, sorry, this is a long rambling answer. But my answer would be, I would ask him, what can I do to help?
What can you do? No, I love that. And that's something that I'll tell my students, like, if you're really stuck, just stop, be present and ask you, look at your horse and go, how can I help you? And I think even if they can't speak English, I think just putting yourself in that mindset, it brings out some curiosity. I wonder how I can help you, and turning on that part of the brain and just having that intention of that you would like to be better or be different or be more helpful to the horse. I think that's a great question to ask. And I think it's possible to get answers if we have ourselves in that frame of mind that we're asking.
Yeah. So it's funny you asked me that question. If you could talk to horses, but then you said, I tell my students to do that. And that's that whole, and that's more of a spiritual thing right there, but it's that whole, being able to sit down and like meditate or whatever, but then ask questions of the universal source or whatever and wait for those answers to come back. And, you've got to be really present to do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You've got to be able to be present to do that and be present.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to just talk a little bit about your podcast. And I'm always so curious because you've interviewed lots of different people. I'm curious, if there's some common threads, because you interview a range of different people and topics, and but one common thread is they're all talking to you. But I'm just curious on your part, like, are there pieces where you're like, oh my gosh, this person said this, and so did that person, and this person also said it in this other way. So that, to me, when that happens, it's like, oh, this is important because it keeps coming up in these different contexts. So yeah, are there common threads, lessons learned that you've gained from talking to so many different people?
Common threads would be personal growth stuff. And probably like you, when I had you on the podcast, it's not something you probably thought you were going to be talking about, the thing I try to do on the podcast is, okay, you are a successful person in whatever you do at this point in time in your life. What are the things that happened to get you to this point? And what's funny is, like, do you know who Jim Masterson is?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, Jim came on the podcast, and Jim thought I was going to be talking about the Masterson method and what he does with horses, and I kept trying to figure out, because he was a groom for hunters or jumpers or something or other, in Florida, and he started noticing, like when he'd be holding the horses for body workers to work on the horses and things like that, he started noticing these little things that were going on and started putting two and two together and ended up coming up with the Masterson method. And so my question to him was, what skills or what life experience did you have before that that led you to be the only groom to figure that out? Like, why haven't all the grooms figured that out, And so I don't know, sometime during the conversation, I said, so where'd you grow up? And he goes, oh, well, Dad worked Dad was a pilot, so we kind of moved around, lived in some different countries. And then he kind of goes on, I'm like, well, let's back up. What countries did you live in? He goes, oh, we lived in the Congo for a while. And then, no, let's back up. You lived in the Congo. What was that like? Oh, yeah, it was cool. But then he goes on with his life. No, let's back up to the Congo. So tell me more about that. And he goes, oh, well, yeah, the people would find these abandoned baby chimps and stuff. And so they bring them to me. And so I had these pet chimps and I would communicate with them and look at their facial language. I'm like, oh, that's why. Okay.
Wow.
Because he was saying, like, with the chimps, like, facial expressions are a big deal and they'll rip your head off if you give them the wrong one. So it's noticing little stuff like that. And then later on, he says, in a sentence, he says, oh, and then I got really into TM, and just continues on with the conversation. I'm like, whoa, let's back up. You got into what? And he said, oh, I really got into transcendental meditation. And where Jim actually lives in Iowa or Indiana or Illinois, one of those high states, is where the main, I don't know if they call it a temple or whatever it is, but the main office for transcendental meditation is there. And he actually moved to that area because he was really into transcendental meditation. So it's things like that. It's personal growth or spiritual growth or whatever that seems to be the common thread to I'd say everybody I've interviewed, even the ones that I didn't expect to go there, like with you, with your little Temple of the Sun story, So yeah, that's kind of been the common thread. But some of the wow moments have been Josh Nickel and Leslie Desmond both said a one-line thing that were very, very similar, but just hit me over the head like a ton of bricks. Josh said, he was talking about with horses, he said the horse basically says, do not take from me what is mine to give you. So don't make me do something that I would actually offer if this situation was right. And Leslie's line was, yes has no value if no is not an option.
Yeah. Love it. I have a sort of similar. The willingness to oblige doesn't give you the right to demand.
Mm. And that's
Same
kind of halfway
sentiment.
between both of those.
Yeah.
Both of
Interesting.
those sayings there. Yeah,
Love that.
there's been some. Oh, recently I've had some crazy conversation on the podcast. There was recently had a lady from LA. She's a transformational specialist, a transformational mentor is what she is. She used to work in sober coaching quite a bit. She actually worked at a place in Malibu called Passages, is where a lot of the movie stars go if they've got an addiction to something or other. And she's been in that sphere a lot, but she's ended up being what she calls a transformational mentor. But she was talking about a book called The Art of War by Stephen Pressfield. And she was talking about following your passion and having the gumption to follow your passion. And in this book, he says that when Hitler's parents died, he was given a small inheritance, and he was really interested in art. And so he took that inheritance and went to art school in maybe Vienna, I can't remember where it was, but went to art school, but he wasn't very good at it. And so he gave up and came home and eventually started World War II. And the point he was trying to make was that it was easier for Hitler to start World War II than it was to follow his passion, even though he wasn't good at it.
Yeah, and I think, hang on. Is this it? The War of Art?
The War of Art, yes.
The War of
That's it
Art,
right
break
there.
through your blocks and win your inner creative battles. It's one of my favorite books. I had it just right over there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love this. It's fun to just open it up to any page and
Yeah, because
there's something.
I've only listened to on Audible, but it sounds
okay.
like, you could read one page at a time and it wouldn't matter which page you read because it's all these little.
Yeah, the War
Yeah,
of Art.
it was anyway. Yeah, so this lady, Christine Dixon's her name, but she was some of the stuff that came out of her was mind-boggling, and it was almost like everything she said was relative to me, and I was the day I did the interview with her, I wasn't kind of at a point where I was ready for that interview with her. It was like any other time it would have been a different experience, but it was and we'll probably get into that bit later, but so the podcast guests have been amazing, and it's funny. When I started the podcast 2 years ago, it was what my wife's idea was, why don't you do like a Dr. Laura horse podcast? So you have people call in like, hey, I've got this problem with my horse and yada, yada, yada. But the first episode I actually did, it was called Changes. And the first episode was just me talking about the way I look at things differently than I used to. And then it kind of went on from there. And then I had a guest on and it was pretty full on. And then we can do another guest like that. And then another and another and another. So it's taken on a kind of life of its own. And we're going to have, in San Antonio this year, we're going to have the Journey on Podcast Summit, which you are going to be a presenter at. Thank you so much for that. And I'm just so excited because the 22 presenters that are going to be there are all inspirational. To have them all in the same room at the same time is going to be amazing. But then the type of people who are interested in coming to the summit is going to add to that energy, to where it's going to be this big collective energy. It's going to be pretty cool. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was so happy to get the email. It's like, you're doing it. Yes. We didn't even really know what it was going to be at that point, but I'm just like, yes. And it's really evolved from something that was like horse technique-y, and it's really embraced what I think the spirit of your podcast is. And you really wanted it to be like the stuff in between all the technique and more of the life lessons. And I think I'm just really looking forward to it. I can't wait to go. And yeah, so maybe you can tell people where they can find out about it, and I'll put a link to it too in the show notes. But yeah, go ahead and tell people where they can.
Originally, it was going to be in California at Rancho Mirada, which is a horse show facility, and then I'm like, nah, but the horses are going to get in the way. This is not a horse podcast, and we don't need another horse demonstration. I want to get to the real stuff, you know. And so then we thought, well, let's have it in a convention center type thing, and just have, you know, people can have PowerPoint presentations if they want, but it's more about the real stuff, not the horse stuff. So it's going to be in San Antonio in November. Our tickets sold out, I don't know, in the first week or so, and because we kept it to, I think there's around 300, 350, something like that, tickets, because it's a small venue. We wanted it to be kind of intimate, and but we're going to have a live stream option available, which I'm not the tech guy, so I can't tell Karen right now where that's going to be. But it's going to be a live stream option available, and which will also be available to play back later on. So if you're in another part of the world or whatever, and you going to be asleep at the time, you can always watch it back later. But yeah, it's going to be pretty fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, warwickschiller.com, and I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes, and yeah, it'll be findable.
It'll be findable on there somewhere. Yeah, we are going to have we have a website, or we're going to have a website for it. Summit.warwickschiller. I'm not sure, but anyway, if you go to our website, you can probably find it from there.
Yeah, cool. All right. What did you want to be as a child? Were you always planning on being a horse trainer?
No. No, I'm one of those guys that am an accidental whatever I am, and so I'll tell you what I wanted to be as a child. So my father rode in rodeos and was a bull rider, and I thought I wanted to be a bull rider when I was younger, and so I rode calves and then junior steers and junior bulls, and I got on 2 real size bulls. Scared the crap out of me.
Smart man.
Well, yeah. Well, but that, so I scared the crap out of me, but so I didn't keep going with it. But that's kind of been the story of my life, to where if things get hard, I take the other road. And there's 2 ways of looking at that. Like, obviously that's not the path for me, so you go this way. There's that way of looking at it, like, go with what the universe presents with you, sort of thing. But then there's the other thing, to where there's some personal growth involved in pushing through hard things. And I've never really done it. I've never really done the hard things. I've always done the easy things, and I've ended up where I've ended up. So obviously, I think I'm supposed to be doing what I'm doing. But these days, I'm kind of trying to, look for things that I can do that challenge me a bit. And I used to think, like to say competing in the reining was that, but the horse riding's easy. So that's, it's not like, well, I wouldn't say the horse riding's easy, but anyway, these days, if I'm going to challenge me, I don't want to have to challenge a sentient being while I'm challenging me.
Gotcha.
Kind of.
Yeah. So back to that focus of what you're working on now, right? What you said yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's an odd situation to be in, and I don't even. You could probably talk about this too. I mean, you have this pretty large online platform, and so you are known to a lot of people. And I think, if you grow up, wanting to be a baseball player or a football player or whatever, or a singer or whatever, you have in the back of your mind that at some point in time, if I get good at this, I'll be famous. Famous is in inverted commas here, but I'll be famous, and all the people know who I am, sort of thing. And So I think you and I have both come to very minor league versions of that. And I don't know about you, but for me, I never expected to be there. So it's kind of an odd place to be, because who do you ask? How do you handle how do you handle being in the public eye when you didn't actually plan to be there in the first place? I don't know if you struggle with that at all.
It's a
Do.
thing. I can look at it from all different perspectives, and actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, now I actually mentor other horse professionals, and who I really seek are the heart-centered horse professionals, because I feel like in order for me to make a better world for horses, I have to help the really heart-centered, horse-first, caring, compassionate, empathetic ones. I want them to thrive, not the ones who are selling the wrong horse to the wrong person for too much. So
right. Yeah.
one thing that comes up a lot is, of a little bit of a fear of like, well, I can't say I do it this way because that's not traditional and everyone's going to think I'm weird. And, for them to really own the special thing that they bring, and to be able to be so bold as to just say it and do it. So, you've done that. You've changed. You were probably more traditional, and now you changed. And I was wondering if you had any words of advice. They've heard my advice, but like, how did you do it? Was it hard for you? Did you feel any like, oh, my colleagues are going to think I'm weird? Like, how do you go ahead and get that courage to just say, this is how I'm doing things now, and we're going to sit here and just be with the horse, even though you came to a clinic for something else, or whatever the version of it is for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. You just said, how do you get the courage to do that? And so I've always done what I think are the easy things, but some of the things I've done, other people think are hard. And so that's one of them. So, I had an online platform, and see that, and even the online platform was totally not planned. I mentioned before that we moved to Australia for a few years. When we moved back, I had to start all over again, and I had some time, and Facebook was now a thing, social media. And I was training some horses, and I had a big Andalusian, 17-1 or 2 Andalusian dressage horse came in that was a problem horse. And so I videoed him. The first day I laid a hand on him, I videoed the first session, the second session, and I started putting these clips up on Facebook and on YouTube just to show people, how easy some things are. Because while I was in Australia, I started doing some clinics, and I had realized that, people struggle with some very basic ideas about horses, and that's what causes a lot of the problems. So I started putting little videos up about just different ways of looking at things. And then, on YouTube at the time, I don't know if it's the same now, but at the time you cannot put longer than 10 minutes on YouTube until you have a certain number of views, because I don't want 3 hours of your cat chasing a laser pointer up and down the hallway. And people had said, no, we want longer videos. I'm like, well, I can't put them on YouTube. And so I had to look for a video hosting site that charged me to put them on there. So I started charging people to watch videos. But that was totally not planned. It wasn't a business plan or anything. So now I'm training horses, and I'm doing some clinics, and I'm also got this video thing. And after a few years of doing that, I'm like, something's got to give. And the video thing was starting to go relatively well. And my son wants to go to college, and I'm a horse trainer. And so I'm like, I realized I'm spending 90% of my time making 10% of my money, like riding horses 6 days a week. And so I decided to stop training horses. And you asked before about, what other people think. That was probably the hardest part, was not training horses anymore. I'm thinking, what will the other trainers think? Like, oh, he wasn't good enough, so he gave up. There was that. But that was probably the only hard part. By the time I came to making that shift, all the videos I'd been making and the stuff I've been putting out was what I was really doing. Like, it's not the, do one thing on camera, another thing behind the barn sort of thing. So I was always very authentic about how I went about things. And as I started to change the way I looked at things, I just was very authentic about that. And once again, no business plan, but you know this, that the demographic that we deal with is basically 35 to 65-year-old females. There's probably 10% of it would be males, less than 10% would be males, and if it is, it's still the same demographic. And, as I started looking at things differently with the horses and getting a bit more about connection, who's looking for connection more than 35 to 65-year-old women with their horses, So I didn't think, oh, I wonder if this is a good idea. I wonder if people are going to think I'm a whack job or whatever. I'm just like, this is how I'm viewing things, and so this is what I want to share. And it actually helped. It actually, there were people that kind of liked what I did but didn't like the way I went about certain things. And they're like, oh, I like what you do now because, I didn't like you in the past because, and so it wasn't hard to do, because I didn't really look at it like this is a win or a lose situation, like this is good or bad. It's like, I'm just sharing what I currently do. I used to share what I did before. Now I'm sharing what I currently do. I didn't really stop and think about it. I probably should have done, because I could have gone belly up and people were like, oh, he's a whack job. I'm not going to watch, I'm not going to do anything with him anymore. It's actually gone the other way. But I really didn't have a plan. I've never had a plan. I've ended up here without having a plan.
I share that, but I think that is important, because it's sharing your authentic self, and just keep focusing on, this is how I help people, because this is how I help people, because this is how I help people, and this is what I do, and it's real. And I think the more we think about that, and then imposter syndrome can't creep in as much. Because it's not this
as much
constructed. Yeah, it's always has a way of creeping in. But well, thanks, because I know that can help a lot of people who do find that hard. It's like, just keep focusing on, this is real, this is what I do, and this is how I help.
I've got some professionals that I wouldn't say I mentor them, but they've been following me and started to change things. And probably the biggest problem they have is like, I'm not sure I want to train horses for the public anymore, because the person would have to change their perspective of things too. And I tell them, there's someone for everybody. If you do things differently, you will just have different clients show up. You know what I mean? You'll get people that view the world the way that you currently view the world.
Yeah. And that's so important, is not to try to fit into what you think people need. Just be yourself, and then find the people that want that. Yeah. All right. What is a common myth about about this profession that you'd like to debunk?
Well, the only reason I chose this question is not so much a myth about. It's a myth about the horse training profession, and it's not necessarily the horse training profession. It was my horse training at the time, but I used to get in a lot of warm bloods, those sorts of breeds of horses that were problem horses. And like I said, I was very, the techniques I used, I was not, it wasn't forcing them or whatever, but I had a warm blood eventing mare that was owned by an eventing trainer around here. They sent me one time, and she bucks. I think she kicked the trainer in the leg and broke a leg, but she bucks is the problem. And I'll get to the point of it here in a minute, but I'll tell a quick story. So I had her for a while, and I worked through all the groundwork, and I was going to start riding her. And I texted the eventing trainer. Her and her mother are both eventing trainers in the area. And I said, I'm going to ride that mare for the first time today. You want to come over and watch? They're like, oh yeah, I want to come over and watch. So, and I don't think I had worked on having her come up beside me on the fence or the mounting block, which I normally do, but the way this story goes, I mustn't have done that. Anyway, so they're at the round pen, and I had a friend visiting from Australia, and he's standing over by the gate next to them. Anyway, so I have this mare come up beside him in the mounting block, and she kind of moves away. And so I said, do ever have any mounting problems with her? And they're like, no, never. I'm like, oh, okay, well, this must be new. But I spent probably half an hour just working on her, where she'd stand there beside the mounting block with me on it. And when I got on, you know, the reins, the buckles on her neck, and she just stands there and I hop on. And the eventing trainer whispers to a mother, and the only reason I know is because my friend was standing right there. She said, oh my God, she's never stood that still for me to get on before. Now, half an hour before, I said, do you have a mounting problem? Like, no, we don't have a mounting problem. Because standing still while getting on is not a problem. But anyway, what I heard later on was she had told someone the reason she sent the horse to me, because the horse bucks and I wear a cowboy hat, so obviously I'm going to ride the buck out of it. So that's my common myth that, you know, because I wear a cowboy hat, I was going to ride the buck out of it. Yeah, but you know, it's funny. On one hand, they think you're going to ride the buck out of it. On the other hand, they don't think the horse won't stand still when you get on is part of a problem.
Yeah.
You know
I have almost the same story.
Yeah, so
I had someone get dumped at a dressage clinic, one that USDF put on, and they asked me, and I'm like, is this normal? Does it always have a bucking problem? Because it bucked when she was getting on. And I said, does she have a mounting problem? They're like, no, you just get a couple people to hold her. She's fine.
Yeah.
I was like, well,
that's
a problem.
I have an identical story to that this place I was training at the time. The guy that owned the place had a jumping horse that went to the Olympics quite a long time ago. And he thought, he's not a horse guy, he's a money guy, but he thought he could breed this stallion and sell the offspring for $100,000 a piece, sort of thing, you know. Anyway, he had me start a few of them that would buy that stallion. And the first one I started was a 4-year-old stallion. And I put he was one of the early horses I put on YouTube. So if you go to my YouTube channel and go to the very early thing, it'd be like first ride outside on a warm bloods day and blah, blah, blah. This horse, I got the groundwork really good. Like, he was a sweetheart. Well, he ended up being a sweetheart. He'd had some problems when he first came in there. But when I went through the saddling process, it took me a month to get him as good at the groundwork while wearing the saddle as he was without the saddle. And he just wasn't very good at changing eyes. So if you're in this eye, but then that stirrup over here moved, like, ooh, 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 oh, and off he'd go. And it took him a long time to get really good with that. So like I said, it was a month before I actually rode him after I saddled him, because it just took that long to get the groundwork that good. And then I started another one, which was very similar. And this is it's an odd, you know, not many horses are like that, but I started probably 2 or 3 others by the same stallion, and they were very similar. And so I was talking to a jumping trainer at the facility who had also had some of those horses by that stallion. And I said, did the ones you have, were they weird? And she goes, oh, yeah, they were weird. She said, I had this one. You could go to a jumping competition and you could jump 3 feet and he'd be fine. But when they went to 3'3", he would lose his mind. Like, he'd go from perfect to, like, one time they put it up to 3'3", he jumped the first jump and bolted and crashed through the arena fence and ran through a crowd of people. And I'm like, whoa, that's weird. I said, how was he to saddle? And she said, oh, he was fine. And I said, so you could just drop the lead rope in the barn aisle and walk in the tack room and grab this. Oh, she goes, oh, no. You need 2 grooms to hold him while you put the saddle on. And I'm like, oh, my goodness, like, out of nowhere. So I've told this story a lot, and I'm like, I didn't say it to her, but I'm like, what a nice horse. He's worried about having the saddle put on him, but he holds that in, and then he's going to be worried about having a rider on him, and he holds that in, and then they're going to ride him around, and then they're going to ride him around, and then they're going to start going over these little grails on the ground, and they're going to go over cross rails, and he still holds it in, and they go over these, 18-inch jumps, and then 2-foot jumps, and then 2.5-foot jumps, and then 3-foot jumps, and once it gets over 3 feet, then he just cannot hold it in anymore, and he loses his mind out of nowhere. You know what I mean?
Suddenly out of nowhere.
Exactly the same thing. Like, yeah, like, he was fine to saddle as long as you have 2 grooms hold him. This is not to get on. This is to saddle him.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's just mind-boggling sometimes that.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. You're out there. You've put yourself out there. Everybody's putting themselves out there on Facebook. Have you ever been insulted? And is there an insult that you've received that you're actually proud of? And for listeners, Warwick gave me permission to ask him this question.
Oh, you know what? I if you'd call them insults, but I've been insulted a lot in the past. And the thing about being in the public eye, you are open to criticism from people. And the thing I realize you have to do is you have to not, like, what's the saying? People that think you're great and people that think you're horrible, you shouldn't pay any attention to either of them because they're both wrong.
Right.
But I do think that I've actually learned a lot from my critics, because you have enough people have the same criticism of you, you start to think, And I haven't had many people criticize me for a number of years now, but in the past, some of the criticism was that I wasn't waiting long enough, all the things that I've changed. And so I wouldn't say that's what made me change, but it all made sense after I started to look at things a bit differently. But probably these days, the criticism I get is, like I talked about that horse of ours, that when you approach him, he does the little head turn thing. I did a video on that a while ago, and like some guy was like, well, you could have bloody walked up and caught him anyway. Like, I think it was an Australian sort of fella, but, like, he's not hard to catch. It's like, it's not about being hard to catch. So, no, I do think, you can tell the trolls right off the bat, and the, people that insult, you can tell it's more about what's gone on with them than what you're actually doing with the horse. But like I said, in the past, I have learned quite a bit from my critics, actually. It's funny. Rob and I don't usually watch much TV, but during COVID, the first year of COVID, I think, we watched American Idol, and there was a guy on there who was just phenomenally talented. Like, this kid was just amazing. And he made it all the way through to the top 10, where they go to Hawaii and they do a concert on the beach. And then the next day they go up in front of the judges and they get whittled down to the top 5. This guy went up in front of the judges, and Lionel Richie said to him, he said, being a star is having equal amounts of self-confidence and self-doubt and keeping it somewhere in the middle. It's like, you can't just think you're great, because you probably won't do the work, and you can't think you suck because you won't stick any longer. You got to kind of keep it somewhere in the middle. And it's a little bit like that with critics. You can't believe the either end too much.
Yeah, and I think it's a good distinction of, like, identify the troll, because just don't worry about them. But that's where the personal power comes in, to not take it personally, but to be able to look at it and go, okay, this is being said, and to not, to be able to look at it and go, is there something to learn? It's information, but not let it go so far in that you believe everything and it crushes you. And I think that middle ground, the truth is always in the middle. I think that's where the hard, yummy stuff of life is like somewhere between. Can I look at it and really see it and take it in and try to be objective and not take it personally? Yeah. Which brings us to personal development. All right, so personal development. I think this is a thread throughout everything that we've talked about. What do you feel is the most worthwhile thing that you've put your time into, and something that you've done that's really changed the course of your life?
I would have to, it's basically changing the way I've looked at things. I'm a huge fan of Wayne Dyer's saying, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. But I was actually at a horse expo in Madison, Wisconsin, the Midwest Horse Fair, I think it's called. Have you ever done that one?
No.
A few years ago, and I met Barbara Schulte, who was actually one of the podcast guests. She's going to be at the summit. And I had to do a stand-up talk. So at the horse expo, sometimes you're doing a demo in the arena with a horse, and sometimes every once in a while they'll give you a stand-up talk. And so I have like a stand-by stand-up talk that I give that's different every time, and it's called Everything I Learned in Life I Learned from Horses. And so I did this stand-up talk, and it was about the time I'd started changing some things. And so I kind of spat out some stuff to a room of a couple of hundred people. Some of it I'd probably never told anybody before. Some of it I may not have ever even admitted to myself before. I'm not sure. But anyway, when I got done, I was walking back to the booth, and I walked past Barbara Schulte's booth, and she said, "Hey, how'd it go?" And I'm like, "Oh, Barb," I said, "I'm exhausted. I feel like I've been run over by a train." And she said, "Why? What happened?" And I said, "Oh, I kind of spat out some stuff up there that I wasn't planning on spitting out before." And she says, "Oh, well, Brene Brown says vulnerability is the ultimate badassery," or something. It was the first time I've heard of Brene Brown. And so I came home and looked up Brene Brown and started listening to some of her audio books. And in one of them, she said, you cannot selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower emotions, you automatically suppress the higher emotions. And, growing up as a male in rural Australia in the 70s, boys don't cry, you don't show fear, blah, blah, blah. And so I knew there was some suppressed stuff in there. And in my family, you don't show grief. Like, go to a funeral and like, oh, well, he's dead, such is life sort of thing. And so I'm like, well, I know there's some stuff that's suppressed, but I never thought about it affecting the other side. Like, could I feel more joy or happiness or whatever? And so that was kind of the start of a bit of a, starting to unravel some stuff. And the further you go, the more you realize, oh, I haven't unraveled anything yet. Like, it gets deeper and deeper. But yeah, I really what it comes down to is unraveling trauma. I'd say that's the big thing that I would say is the probably the most worthwhile thing I've done, even though I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, is, and trauma's not what happened to you. Trauma's what happens, what stays in your body because of what happened to you. And so what you find out when you get in that rabbit hole is it's not the big things that are, it's not the big things that might cause the problems. It might be little things, and it might be something someone said to you sometime, or whatever. And it's unraveling it. It's as you start to unravel it, it's interesting because you'll shed one layer of stuff and like, oh, I feel completely different. And then you shed another layer of stuff like, I feel completely different. And then you're like, how different can I feel? I mean, how much of this cultural conditioning and whatever can I shed? And who will I be on the other side of it? Because I think, I'll talk for me personally here, but I think most of us don't even know who we are. We are just who we've been conditioned to be. And when you get to unravel that stuff, it's deep, but it's pretty interesting when you get in there and start unraveling some stuff, and you can let go of things. I had a couple of experiences recently that were of a plant medicine nature, you might say, some guided experiences. And one of them, I let go of something that I've been holding on to for all my life and I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but the next day I don't know if I was standing or laying down or whatever, but I took a breath and it went in, and it got to the point to where that's as much breath as I can ever take in, and in, and in, and in, and in. I had more room to expand, to breathe in. I took twice as big a breath as I've ever taken in my entire life. And what I found was when I let it out, oh my God, I actually completely relaxed. And yeah, I let go of some sort of a restriction in me somewhere that has been, it's been tension. I've been holding on to something or other. And I'm not sure what it was I let go of, but I do know that there's a difference in my body afterwards to where, like I said, I can take a much deeper breath than I've ever taken in my entire life. And when I let that breath out, I feel a sense of relaxation I don't think I've felt before either. So yeah, and it's an ongoing it's an ongoing thing. But one of those particular experiences was the day before I did that podcast with that lady I was telling you about, where she talked about Hitler, and so, and I said everything she said that day was like, oh, this would have meant something different 2 days ago, So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about personal growth, but that it feels like, it doesn't, to me, personal growth doesn't feel like, oh, I'm adding more to myself. It actually feels like getting rid of the stuff that's been shrinking me. Like I think we're whole and complete when we're born. And then as Don Miguel Ruiz talks about our domestication that happens so early, and we become a domesticated version of ourselves. And then the rest of our lives are trying to shed it, so that when you shed it, it's like there's the growth is the expansion of what you have been contracting. That's right. The sensation it gets for me. And then identifying, like, when something comes along, you go, I'm not putting that layer on myself. I'm not identifying it before it gets in and starts to shrink us again, or shrink me.
Yeah, and the thing is, until you start doing that work, you don't even know you have those, that stuff that you have on you. You didn't even know it's there. You just think that's you. And so that's the exciting part, when you finally understand that, you can shed some of that and be different on the other side.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you feel your true purpose in the world is? Are you just a horse trainer there, Warwick? Is that how we should define you?
I'm going to tell you a story that will be as freaky to you as it was to me.
Awesome.
Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
So a few years ago, my wife went to Canada and did an equine assisted learning. It's not equine assisted therapy, because she's not a therapist, but did an equine assisted learning thing, because she kind of thought she wanted to work with like at-risk women and youth and things like that. And so it wasn't long after that she went over to the coast from here, so over near Santa Cruz, and did a workshop with two other women, presented at this workshop with two other women. And both of these women at this workshop said to her, have you seen Denise yet? And Robin's like, Denise? Who's Denise? And they're like, oh, you got to go see Denise. And they gave Robin Denise's phone number. So Robin makes an appointment to go see Denise. And I was doing clinics in Australia at the time. And so I called her one night and I said, how's it going? She goes, I went and saw an astrologer today. And I'm like, really? We're not astrologer type people. And she said, yes. So she recorded the whole conversation, and you would not believe what she told me. Like, it's amazing what she could tell me about me. And so I came home and I listened to it. And I'm like, well, that's cool. You think I should go? She said, yeah, you should go. And this is about the point in time I'd started changing what I was doing. It was a couple of years in. I was getting a bit woo. And I had, I don't know, my YouTube channel now has got like 25 million views. And at the time it had maybe 20 million views. But, we're getting some sizable sort of numbers sort of here. And I am, like I said before, I'm being authentic about where I'm going in life and whatever. So anyway, I go over there and she wants your date of birth, time of birth and place of birth. And so I had to call Mum and actually ask her what time I was born. And then she prints your charts out and she goes through your charts. And so and I'm not expecting anything. I'm just like, whatever. And she's going through these charts. She goes, oh, wow, this is interesting. You don't see this very often. So, you're the Cryon, or Cryon, the wounded healer archetype. Mm-hmm. And she says, well, basically what this chart is telling me, from the moment you were born, your whole purpose here on earth has been to gather tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands, and lead them towards consciousness. Wow. And I'm like, whoa, I'm just a horse trainer, And at the time when I was sitting there with her, she went through some other stuff and I'm like, okay, that's pretty heavy, but whoa. And so I was believing it. And then when we left there, I'm like, nah, hang on. You put my name into Google, there is only one person with my name. Okay, very few people with my first name, not a lot with my last name. And you put the two together, there's only one, the first 100 pages are going to be me. She's looked me up. She's full of crap. That because that can't be right. That's not right. And you know what they say about the universe: if it sends you a message and you don't listen, it sends you a bigger one. So I was doing a clinic in Michigan a couple of months later, and I'm no urban dweller, so like urban settings kind of weird me out a little bit, you know. And I do know that the two most dangerous cities in America are in Michigan: Flint, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan. Now, I wasn't in either of those places doing a clinic, but I'm still in Michigan and I'm a country boy, so whatever. And so I did like 2 clinics back to back, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I was probably an hour's drive. The hotel was probably an hour's drive from the clinic, and I went to dinner after the clinic with the clinic organizer and got finished about 10:30 or whatever. I've got an hour drive back to the hotel, and I've got a 7 o'clock flight, so I've got to be at the airport at 6, and then I'm backtracking, and I'm like, oh, I've got to fill the rental car up with gas too. I might as well do it tonight. So I drive around looking for a gas station, and I find a gas station in like not a residential, what do you call it? A commercial, you know, like an industrial area of inner city type industrial area type thing. And I pull in, and there's all these young youth loitering around of the gangbanger looking type, you know, the way they're dressed and the whole thing. And I'm a bit on edge, and I pull up and I jump out and I swipe my card and I grab the gas handle and I try to open the gas cap and I can't get it open. I'm like, oh God, how do I get it open? I'm looking in the car and I'm trying to find the thing, and I'm getting more and more frantic and fun. I'm like, screw this, I'm out of here. I don't care if I got it. They charge me $10 a gallon for gas. So I hang up the thing and I jump in the car and I start the car. Now I'm driving the smallest rental car you can buy, like a compact, maybe not a subcompact, but a compact. So there's nothing that would give any indication of who I am, what I do. I've got a pair of jeans on, a plaid shirt, and a ball cap, I think. Start the car and I start to drive away, and there's on the driver's side window, and I turn and I look, and there's this African-American guy right there with his head right up against the window, and he's got a really serious neck tattoo and a bit of skin off one eye, and I turn and look at him, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go. And he puts his hands up and kind of steps back away from the window, and he says something like, you know, I don't mean to hurt you, mister. And what he sounded like and what he looked like were at odds with each other. He had a cultured, educated Southern accent. And so it made me pause for a second. I wound the window down just to crack. I'm like, can I help you? He said, excuse me, sir, can I just tell you my problem? He says, I'm a gospel singer from Alabama. I have a degree in religious studies from such and such university, and I've come up here to help build a church, and I got called off, and there was some miscommunication. I've been sleeping rough for a couple of nights, and I just need $19 to get a hotel room. I've got some money. I just need $19 more. And you know, and he said, I know you're probably going to say, well, why don't you sleep in a hostel? Well, I can't sleep in a hostel because I don't have a Michigan driver's license. Otherwise, I would, and I'm really sorry to bother you. And he's very polite and very well spoken. Like at this point in time, I'm like, I'm going to give the dude some money. And so I turn the car off and roll the window down, and I shake hands through the window and say, hey, I'm Warwick. And he tells me his name, and I wish I could remember what it was, but I don't know what it was. And so as we shake hands and I tell him my name, he says his name, and then he starts to sing. And he is a gospel singer. So I'm in this rundown gas station in this industrial area in somewhere in Michigan at 11:30 at night, and this guy's singing to me a cappella, and it sounds like a church.
Wow.
But we're no longer shaking hands. We're holding hands through the window. So I'm looking him in the eye. He's looking me in the eye. We're holding hands. And he sings this whole gospel song all the way through, takes his sweet time. And then when he stops singing, then he starts praying. And he's praying, and he takes his sweet time praying too. So we've probably been holding hands and looking at each other in the eye for 5 or 6 minutes by this point in time. And it doesn't feel weird. Nothing's going on. I'm going to get to the punchline here in a minute, don't worry. And then he stops, and it's almost like he had a bit of a download or whatever. He stops praying. He looks at me and he goes, I don't know what you do for a living, mister, but your whole purpose here on this planet is to gather, I think he said, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people
Wow.
and lead them towards God. And then he said, but the only thing holding you back is your fear. And it's like, oh shit, you read me like a book. And at that point in time, his left hand, I can't remember if we're still holding hands or not. His left hand reaches around behind him and he reaches like into the waistband of his pants. And I'm like, oh, so this is how it happens. And I just had this like peace come over me, like, so, okay, now I know. Anyway, then his hand came out from behind him and there was nothing in it. He must have an itchy ass or something or other. But anyway, so I gave him $100 and said, get some food, get some sleep, whatever. Started the car, pulled out of there, drove half a block down the road and pulled over on the side of the road. And I'm like, what the freaking hell just happened? So then I texted my son the whole story. Texted it all out to him. Then I drove to the hotel and I got in the hotel. Then I called him and he goes, what the hell is this text, Dad? It doesn't make any sense. And so I told him the story and it did make sense. And, you tell a story like that enough times, it changes. Well, I've got the original transcript of what I said, and that's what I said at the time.
Wow. Yeah.
That's why I chose
moment
that
of silence on that. So that's your life's purpose. Wow.
And so, like even the podcast summit is along those lines. It's not about horses. It's about personal growth and connection to source or whatever, and consciousness and that sort of thing. But, it has a horsey connotation. I think the horses are the thing that lead us in that direction.
Yeah, the horses are the context or the excuse or the...
Yeah, you could be, it could be martial arts. It could be anything that gets big enough to where you're not doing it, you're not riding horses just to ride horses anymore. You're not doing martial arts because you don't want to get beat up at school or whatever. It becomes more of a discipline. And I think that's...
It's a passion, when you tap into a passion or something you really care about, then it's like the pull, that it's the reason you go through these journeys. Do you have any regrets?
And so, no, I don't actually, because I don't have any regrets at all, because obviously I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing. I haven't had a plan. I'm not a good planner. I'm not a good organizer. This has just happened by happenstance. And then, you have what we call the night I met Black Jesus incident and things like that. And it's like, no, everything that's happened has led me to this point for a reason. And if it had been different, it would be different. And even all the, all the trauma and unraveling all that stuff is like, that influences my work with the horses a lot. And my work with the horses influences the people who are working with their horses. And I talked about Brene Brown before, and she, in one of her books, she said that she didn't used to work with men or boys. She only worked with women and girls. That was her focus, helping women and girls. But then she said, at some point in time, it dawned on her, if we're not doing anything for men and boys, we're doing nothing.
Wow.
For women and girls. And for me, I think, and I'm really big on mental health these days, but I feel like if we're not doing anything for the mental health of the humans who have the horses, we're not doing anything for the horses. You can't just be, this is about horse training, because the perceptions, the judgments, the labels, the energy of the people with the horse who have the horses, a lot of times is what's holding them back. Like the techniques don't work for them because of the intention behind it, and a lot of that is stored trauma and all sorts of stuff. And I think I personally want to help the horses, but I do think that helping the horses the way I'm trying to do it is actually doing the purpose that I'm supposed to be here for.
Nice.
And it's,
so here's,
it's,
okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to finish up and say one thing. It took me a while to tell that story. Not here. I mean, after it happened, it's like, I can't tell people that. They'll think I'm, got some sort of a Jesus complex or something, And then I'm like, but it happened. And not only did it happened a certain way, as in, like I was a mainstream horse trainer and had a lot of people following what I was doing on social media or on YouTube or whatever. And then when I started going a bit down this path, I was still relatable enough to where people could go, yeah, I'll take a look at that too. Rather than like if I was only there. Like it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel. There's lots of people who, with horses that are way down the path, but they're not relatable to the average person. You know what I mean? And so I got to thinking about it. I'm like, no, that happened and this is what's happening. And okay, I'm just going to man up and tell the story. If you think I'm a whack job, that's on you. I don't mean you, but whoever hears the story, they can judge me how they want it.
Well, and that's the thing, the judgment, the power of judgment, right? And other people judge us, but then we judge ourselves pretty powerfully too. And then we try to imagine what other people are judging. And, I think that's so much human energy is wasted, spent on trying to, something related to judgment, trying to either judging ourselves or trying to figure out how other people might be judging us and then being affected by the way they're judging us. It's just like, well, in the end, it's like, be you.
There's an amazing quote I heard Jay Shetty say, but it's not Jay Shetty's quote. I forget whose quote it is, but it says, you are not who you think you are. You are not who I think you are. You are who you think I think you are.
Ain't that the truth? Unfortunately. Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right. One last question. Have you ever had a paranormal experience?
I forgot to put this one in there.
Unless that last story you told was kind of close.
No, that wasn't it. I think that was an earthly experience. No, so here in the last month, I've had 2 healing ceremonies, plant medicine healing ceremonies. And have you ever done any psychedelics?
I did the ayahuasca.
That you want to admit to? Oh, you did ayahuasca. Okay. So,
I did.
Recently?
On my birthday in April.
Oh, wow. Go you. And how was that? You want to talk about that or not?
It was my birthday. Oh, it was amazing.
It was your birthday?
Yeah.
There's a place that you go to, another dimension that you go to on psychedelics. And so I had a couple of healing journeys about 2 weeks apart. And then anyway, so recently I was in North Carolina to do a clinic and I came down with COVID and got stuck in a hotel room for 5 days. And so I just was laying on a bed in a hotel room for 5 days. And when I came back, I was still, it had been 7 days since I first had symptoms. But when I came back, I was still testing positive. And so Robin had me sleep in the horse trailer. So I'm out in the horse trailer one afternoon, in the middle of the afternoon, laying on the bed in the horse trailer. And suddenly half of my vision, like the whole right side of my body, was in that dimension you go to on psychedelics. It was in that space. And I could see both spaces. I could see the left side of my body in the horse trailer, and it was there. And it freaked me the hell out. And I went, oh, and I sucked back from it, and it went away. But there was a portal, an opening right there that I could have, if I just had a relaxed into, I could have gone to that space. So I don't know if that counts as paranormal, but it freaked me the hell out. I had to call my mentor about that sort of stuff, and he had to talk me down from the ledge because I was like.
So it was scary. Was it scary?
Oh yeah. But the two healing journeys I've had recently were both very, very scary. And what was really interesting about them was what they made me realize is, I've been shut down most of my life, and I thought I've been shut down emotionally because I have such strong emotions that I blocked them out. But these two healing journeys recently made me aware of how much fear I have, absolute terror. And I'm thinking that's I'm blocking a lot of that out. And my mentor was telling me, he said that's pretty normal because, you have the ego death sort of thing, but you get to choose whether you actually want to let go or not. And, on the journeys I was on, I wouldn't let go. So I was fighting it the whole time. But I was talking to Jane Pike the other day. So Jane's going to be presenting at the
Nice.
thing. And she's been on the podcast, and I was telling her about it, and she said, well, so she was really into yoga for like a decade, and lived in India and lived in an ashram and lived in Burma and different places. But she was saying like the Buddhists will actually, I think it's in Burma maybe, they don't bury the bodies or burn them, and they just throw them out so that the birds can come and pick them, and they go back into this, the energy goes back into the circle of life easier. Well, the novice monks, what they have them do, they make them go and meditate with the dead bodies. And it just makes them fully aware that we are going to die, like of our own mortality. And Jane was saying that, in Western society, we don't, you can't see a dead person. You can't say, I want to go see a dead person. You're not allowed to see a dead person. And she said one of the reasons why we have this disconnect between us and the natural world, like we're different from animals, we're not like animals, is so that when you drive along the road and you see a dead raccoon or whatever, that's not me. That's them. That doesn't happen to us. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, that is a huge separation of, just blocking out our own mortality. But anyway, so recently in my couple of experiences, I came to realize that, how much actual fear I have. And what's funny is, my wife suffers from anxiety, and, I've always been the calm one, and she's always been the anxious one. I realize I'm only calm because I'm so anxious I block it all out, So, yeah.
Yeah, that's
interesting stuff. Once again, it's learning more about yourself,
Yeah. And so that's interesting. I think it's kind of it's cool how even under the question about paranormal, it comes back to personal. We are stardust, right? So what's more cosmic than our own selves, which is, I think, really interesting when it keeps wrapping around to this interesting paradox of like personal development, but it's also like the infinite cosmos, and it's all the same. So our next podcast, we can talk about quantum physics together.
Hey, let's do it. I'm all over the quantum physics these days.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up this episode now because we could talk forever, but I think we should do this in smaller doses and I'll have you back. But thank you so much. I mean, I think this is going to be something that I'm going to enjoy editing and listening to again. And I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy. It's a pretty interesting conversation for a guy who wears a cowboy hat sometimes. I really appreciate your ability to, in Brene Brown's words, rumble with vulnerability and to share everything that you share. And, how can you not? I think it's such an important story that you have and such an important message, and it feels real and it feels helpful. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you being here.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. It's been a fun conversation.